might be helpful to define the regulative principle. This is something we believe as a church. We're not the only Christians that believe it. We're Reformed Presbyterians, Evangelical Presbyterians believe in it. The Presbyterian Church of Ireland believes in the regulative principle. Where we differ is how it applies or what it means, but we all have the same principle that we believe. And the regulative principle is that we only do in worship what God has commanded us explicitly to do. It's as simple as you don't wander up to the Holy God with your ideas. He's not interested in your ideas. He's told us how to worship. In fact, he's given whole books of his Bible underlining this point. You read the story of the Exodus. God rescues his people to make them his people so that he can pour out blessing upon blessing upon blessing on them. He gives them his law to rule over them, and then he begins to give them very detailed and very specific instructions about how he is to be worshipped. Second half of Exodus, into Leviticus, the sacrifices in Numbers. And again, just as one example, Moses, as he is given the instructions to build the tabernacle, you have 5 chapters of giving the instructions, and you then have 5 chapters of Moses following those instructions. We were talking earlier, some was about structure within the Bible, and what the writers knew. I think that's very deliberate. God says, do this, and we're told, we're not left to assume that Moses did it. We see Moses do it, and actually, at the end of each section, it says, and Moses did as the Lord commanded him. You don't wander into God's presence with your own ideas. He's a holy God, and we see people punished for doing that. Cain, Leviticus 10, the sons of Levi, they bring unauthorized, unasked for, unapproved worship to God, and it's serious. He puts them to death. Thankfully, he's very merciful. He doesn't put us to death when we worship him in ways not commanded, but it shows how serious it is. So that's the regulative principle. When does it apply? I think we can be very clear it applies in public worship, when the Lord's people meet on the first day of the week as his people for the preaching of his word together, including often the sacraments. It definitely always applies in public worship. There are other types of worship, private, personal worship, family worship. There are other events where worship happens. Does it apply to these? I'm going to say I think that's a bit of an open question. I think a good rule of thumb is, if you're looking at a situation, are people meeting deliberately and intentionally to worship God? Well, then I think that's a good rule of thumb that the regulative principle does apply, and I think that covers Christian Union meetings. I think that covers family worship. I think particularly in family worship, because that's the seed of public worship, and so it should reflect public worship. Whenever I grew up in a church plant, or in the teenage years joined a church plant, and whenever we officially became a congregation, people became members, and there's this wee old man, George, who, I don't know what church he'd been in most of his life, but he'd come to us, enjoyed the preach, enjoyed the fellowship, enjoyed everything about it, and he joined as a member. And I remember him saying in a meeting as we're talking about becoming a member, what he said, I'm okay with singing the Psalms, and I'm happy to and enjoy them, but when I'm in the shower in the morning, I'm going to keep on singing my hymns, if that's okay. Yes, George, that is okay. That is more than okay. In fact, it's a good thing to do. Beautiful Christian poetry that has a place, far better than most of the stuff we hear on our radio, by all means. The distinction is between what is public worship and the rest of life. I suppose one final thought I would say about people, pretty exposed to the main area we see this interface is singing hymns, should we or shouldn't we at Christian Union and things like that. I would be, a lot of these questions were in areas where we're applying principles to specific incidents or instances in life, and I don't like making absolute black and white rules for things that are not black and white in the Bible. I would not encourage someone to sing hymns when they go to Christian Union, especially if they're a member of the Reformed Presbyterian Church. I think it's an important witness we bear to the world. We don't stand grumpy. We can worship in our hearts. We can meditate on what's being sung. So don't look morbid and grumpy. Definitely not. So I wouldn't condemn someone, but I wouldn't encourage it either. So if you can live with that tension and that balance, I wouldn't condemn someone for doing it if they're going along to Christian Union. But I think there's reasons not to do it. We don't need to be ashamed that we sing only psalms. We stand in the mainstream tradition of the church with good reason. I should have said this earlier. Why is there need to sing hymns? 150 perfect worship songs full of Jesus Christ. I don't see a need for hymns.